Hi there, my name's Annette with Sunbeam Fabric Art. Welcome to my channel. Today we're going to work on block number 2 of our Scraps or Stash Quilt Along. And here is my block number 2. I'm using a lot of browns and cream colors in this sampler quilt, but come along with me today and I'll show you what we did for block 2. I'm looking at my Barbara Brackman Encyclopedia of Quilting, and I'm using this 1631C as my guide for the block I'm doing for this particular week. I'll put the cutting guide for 1 or 2 blocks into my description of this video. I'm going to be making 2 of these blocks. For each block, I'm using 4 background fabric that are 4.5 inches square and 1 dark fabric that is also 4.5 inches square. So for 2 blocks I need 8 of those background squares that are 4.5 inches and 2 of the 4.5 inch dark squares. Now for each block I'm going to need 2 background squares that are 6 inches and 2 of my dark fabric that is 6 inches. But since I'm making 2 blocks, I need to double that. To get started, I am going to be taking my 6-inch squares and making them first into half square triangles, and then I'm going to take the half square triangles and turn them into hourglass blocks. I'm taking my background fabric, I'm drawing a diagonal line from corner to corner across each of my background 6-inch squares. Now I will place a dark 6-inch square right sides together with one of the background 6-inch squares. I'm going to be stitching down both sides of this line that I drew about 1/4 inch away from the line, again on both sides. And technically, just to let you know, you could probably do 5.5 inch squares. I'd like to give myself quite a bit of extra wiggle room. With that done, I am going to cut down the center of these squares on the line I drew. That's going to create my half square triangles. Then I'm going to open those up and press them to the dark side. With those half square triangles all pressed, it is time to create some hourglass blocks. I'm going to take half of my half square triangles and I'm going to draw a line on the wrong side, corner to corner, a diagonal line. I'm using my ruler to match a horizontal line to that seam. That way I'll get a nice 90-degree angle. Next, I'm going to take one of the squares, one of the half square triangles that doesn't have a line, put it right sides together with one that does have the line, and I'm making sure my darks and my lights are opposite from each other. Because I pressed to the dark side, these seams are going to lock. I kind of slide together until I feel those seams locking together. Then I place a pin to hold this into place until I can stitch, and I'm going to stitch on one side of the line first, about 1/4 inch. Then I'm going to stitch on the opposite side of that line, about 1/4 inch. I'm going to cut these units apart on the line that I drew, and that is going to create my hourglass block. Before trimming, I pressed these hourglass blocks flat. To trim an hourglass block, I use the diagonal line on my ruler, lining that up with one of my seams. And I'm trimming these blocks to 4.5 inches. So I'm going to need to find the 2.25 inch line on my ruler. Where those two lines meet is going to be where those seams cross. I'm going to cover up where those seams cross with where the 2.25 lines on my ruler meet. Now you can see, going here at regular speed, just real life speed, I take a lot of time when I'm lining up these cuts for hourglass blocks. They're a little bit tricky. Once the right hand side and the top side are trimmed, I can flip the block around. Now I can also use the 4.5 inch lines on my ruler, as well as that diagonal line and the 2.25 inch marks to trim the other two sides of this block. Now it's time to lay out this 8-point design block. I'm putting my hourglass blocks in a cross pattern with the lighter shade facing the center. My dark 4.5 inch square goes in the middle, and my background 4.5 inch squares go around the outside edges. And since I'm making two blocks, I am just laying out the pieces for the second block right on top of the first block. I'll be stitching these individual units together to make rows. Then I will stitch the rows together to finish the block. I'm taking the two leftmost units from the first row. I'm going to place those right sides together and stitch my 1/4 inch seam. I'm going to be chaining these, so I'm taking the two leftmost units of row 2, placing them right sides together and stitching that 1/4 inch seam. I continued grabbing those two leftmost units for each row and stitch them all together. Next, I started adding that third unit to each row. To put my rows together, I started with row 1 and row 2. I put them right sides together, and where those units come together, I want one seam to go one way and one seam to go the other way. I kind of feel these with my fingers until they catch or lock. Then I place a clip in there to hold that together until I get to the sewing machine. With all the clips in place, I stitched each row together. Now I came across a little pucker here, so I went ahead and took my seam ripper and I took that out. If it's a tiny mistake, I usually don't worry about it, but this pucker really annoyed me, so I wanted to make sure and get that out of this block. And what I had to do was, somehow this background fabric was a little stretchy. It usually isn't, but I had to put pins in that section to even it out so that it would sew evenly without a pucker. I probably did a little extra pressing when I pressed these hourglass blocks and stretched it, because those do end up being on the bias when you do the hourglass blocks, so you can get a little stretching on those. As they say, all's well that ends well, and here are my finished 2 sampler blocks for this second in the series. Thanks for coming along with me today. I hope to see you back again real soon.